Let's bring in our panel now. In Rome, we have Simone Pillon. He's a member of the Italian Parliament for the Lega party. In Johannesburg is Stefan Sakoschek. He's a representative of France's National Rally Party. And Jacques Reland joins me from Saint-Malo in northern France. He's a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Jacques Reland, let me start with you. So we had Salvini criticize the French, and then after that, the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy, Luigi Di Maio, he hangs out with the Yellow Vests protesters. He takes pictures with them, says he met with the leadership, and then he tweets, "The winds of change have crossed the Alps." Tell me just how fundamentally insulted the French were by that act.
Insulted, yes, they felt a bit insulted, but I think they think it's more kind of play acting on the part of Italy. Italy is now looking for a scapegoat. Italy is not going through a very good patch since this government has taken over in June. The country has entered in recession, 2 quarters of minus 0.2 and minus 0.1 for the GDP. So the situation is not too good. And in that case, you need to find a boogeyman. You need to find a scapegoat for your problem. And there's nothing better than attacking France, especially as France has criticized this government from the start. Actually, Macron started it when in June he said that the populist leprosy had arrived in Europe with the arrival of this Salvini-Di Maio government.
Simone, is that what's happening? Your government is looking for a boogeyman and France is an easy target. This is noise and not substantial. Is that what's happening?
Well, I believe that we are making a new Europe. We have to choose a new way, because today Europe is only a sort of financial lobbies and big companies issue. And we have to go to the roots of Europe, and the roots of Europe are in people, in European peoples. And so this is what we are doing to do. What we are looking to do. We have to restart from the beginning, to restart from people, and not from populism, but from people needs, from people desires, from people's hearts, and to do a new Europe with a soul, with a really soul, right, and not without soul like this one.
Right. Simone, Emmanuel Macron has said Italy deserves leaders worthy of its history. He doesn't respect your ruling coalition as worthy of leading the great nation of Italy. How do you feel about that?
Well, I believe that Italy and France peoples are very close and are united from a very long time ago friendship. But the actual government in France has made some mistakes. Doesn't start from people, but prefer to start from lobbies, from banks, and from financial lobbies. And so the words of Mr. Macron are understandable in this way. Mr. Salvini, our deputy president, and Mr. Di Maio are saying this. Right. Our friendship is with people of France, but Macron is not giving word to his own people.
Understood. Let me bring in Stefan Sakoschek here. So, Stefan, is this just noise ahead of EU elections with a tit-for-tat, or is there something deeper? Are we seeing clear examples of EU progressives versus EU populist nationalists?
I think we are. Thanks for having me. I think we are, and I will join Simone in his comments, or support his comments. I think Italy's nation and France's nation are very much friends, and have been so for decades and centuries, in exchange of population back and forth. I think what we mustn't forget, in my particular position, I represent the Rassemblement National. I clearly didn't vote for Macron. Macron is clearly not my president. That's one thing which we have to take out of the equation. And I would take a much broader macroeconomic view or geopolitical view on Europe and its relations with each individual member state. And I think relative to Di Maio's comments on France being still the ex-colonial master of Africa, we have to take an entirely different view on that as well. It can be,
but I mean,
construed
Stefan,
both
with that
ways.
sort of stuff about the Italians saying France is the ex-colonial master of Africa and so on, I mean, the Italians have to have a lot of naivety and amnesia to even criticize the French over that, because the Italians bungled it, right? It sounds as if they were jealous that France was so successful and so diabolical at their colonialism, and the Italians screwed up in Libya and elsewhere.
Perhaps some of that, but the historical ties, we can't forever go back into the relations between France and Africa, or the UK and Africa for that matter. We have to be a bit progressive and take matters forward, I would say. So they are almost non-comments.
Okay, this is interesting because, I mean, you brought it up and it was some of the more colorful stuff that we heard from the Italians about the French. So Jacques Reland, as we kind of categorize the comments, right? So we have direct support for the yellow vest protesters. This is, a serious issue on the ground. People protesting from various parts of society on the left, the right, and so on. It's very difficult to figure out who exactly they are and what they represent. Clearly, there's discontent. That's something real. But then there's the sort of flinging mud over the colonial history and stuff like that. How do we kind of pass through this and find what the Italians are serious about and what they're not?
It's very difficult to know what they're serious about, because it's very difficult to accuse migrations from Africa arriving in Europe to accuse the French colonialism for that. It's a long time ago, and that France has been obviously a big colonial power, and the France-Africa relationship has been very strong, and sometimes you can say could be very heavily criticized. But France is no longer the main player in Africa. You have countries such as China, even Russia. Everyone wants to be involved in Africa. And let's not forget that the migrants are not actually coming from French Africa. Di Maio, I think, criticized France because said that they maintained colonialism through the CFA, the French, the African French currency. But this currency, which has been chosen by 14 countries, is actually not bad for the countries. And any country which doesn't want to belong to the franc CFA area can leave when they want. If they're not leaving, is because there's economic integration in the area, ability to trade, international credibility.
Simone, let's bring you in here. Is your main problem with the French their migration policy, or more that they are hypocritical about their migration policy, that they're actually quite tight on migration, but they like to preach to everybody else?
Well, I believe that the situation of immigration is really and quite different as the one who media tell us. At the first point, we have to remember that we are not in front of a common kind of migration, but it's a biblical kind of migration. So I believe that it's really a deportation, not a migration. This is the first issue. The second one is that it's very strange if you remember that Italy has to receive all migrants in his own country, and then they have not to go in Europe. They have to stay in Italy, and this is the word of Europe until 2018. Now we are struggling for make a new way of migration, and so only legal migration, no illegal migration. Only legal migration, and only if we are capable of stay with these people and to prepare to them a job or a hope, a future. It's not possible to do like we are doing until now. And so, for example, having a lot of people, young people. We are making poor Africa because we are deporting young people here in Europe without hope.
Okay,
This is not possible.
Okay.
And so
I mean,
we're starting to change.
That's the other side of this coin here on migration, right? It's very clear. And there are two very fundamentally different visions about migration on the continent right now. And your government has a very specific one, which is, I guess, along the lines with Poland, with Hungary, and a few other countries. And we're seeing these fault lines develop over policy. Stefan, you're in this interesting position here because obviously you want your country, France, to do well, but you're closer to the Italians on this debate. The French see it as Italian ministers going on the ground in places like Paris as destabilizing or trying to destabilize France. To what extent would you accept that they are they're making a bit of mischief and a bit of menace in your country?
I think France hasn't waited for anyone to cause itself a bit of mischief and a bit of unrest. I think we have the rise of a great discontent of a big chunk of the population. I think it's a natural phenomenon in France. I think France is very, very democratic and perhaps even over. So I don't think interference from any one of its member states within the EU has anything to do with it. I think it has to do with ideology and socio-economic positions on certain matters that are relevant. The bit of it, we're obviously joining forces with Italy and Austria and Hungary to establish a European parliamentary. The opposition is obviously going to use any event they can get their hands on to say that it's agitation and mischief. It's just following the normal course of where the rest of Europe is going. Is that Europe as we knew it, and I must say it, I was one of the first ones to sign the 1994 Maastricht Treaty. But Europe as we wanted it has completely veered off the right track. We're sitting on a 30,000 civil servant bureaucracy in Europe deciding who and what gets normalized. And now that they've run out of things to normalize, they're trying to draft as many multilateral and bilateral treaties as they possibly can just to keep themselves busy. So I was mentioning earlier, we have to take a bird's eye view on the political unrest at the moment in Western Europe, whether it's Italy or France, and really look at Europe's position in Africa and see who are the real beneficiaries behind the current setup. The political refugees and asylum seekers are, there's illegal immigrants we don't want. They are a consequence of Europe's aid to Africa for the last 30 or 40 years. The direct beneficiaries right now are actually the Chinese. I can expand on that a bit later on. We want a selective process. We want Europe to be reconstructed. We want a selective process in our immigration. We want to be able to say, much like the Middle East or the United States or Asia for that matter, we want to be able to choose who is...
Right, and we're running out of time here. I want to get a final comment from Jacques here, right? Jacques, we're hearing that, this is substantial. This is something to take seriously between Italy and France as it's ramped up over the past few months. But there's a view that when the EU elections pass, this will die down. Is that what's going to happen?
It probably will die down after that. But at the same time, I would like to go back on this issue of migration, which is very important. Migration is not biblical. The migration has stopped. There was a huge amount of immigration. Over 1 million arrived in 2015, and since then the figures has been going down. Last year there was less than 100,000 migrants coming, and among them many were political refugees fleeing areas where they could not survive, dictatorship and so on. So and at the same time, yes, Europe has to accept political refugees. There's international conventions. We have to accept them. The big issue is about how to spread them. Quite a lot of them arrive in Italy now. It was 80% arrived through the Mediterranean and Italy. The main problem is Europe is unable to decide on a common asylum policy.
Totally.
And reparting quotas. And that's the French idea, that when instead we have the Dublin Convention, people have to ask for asylum in the country where they arrive. And obviously, Italy has taken the brunt of it. But now Italy has gone too far by preventing boats from landing on its coast and by letting boats in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, Jacques, I'm going to come. And of course, there was a big debate over Aquarius, which arguably started all of this, right? It's at the heart of the debate in Europe. Some feel that the policy is unfair, the bureaucrats in Brussels favor some countries over others, and so on. It's a question of fairness and a question of a differing vision for what Europe means. It's not going to go away anytime soon, especially with Brexit and other things, and we'll continue to cover it. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers, but I have to move on. Simone Pillon, Stefan Sakoschek, and Jacques Reland, thanks again.